Good morning and welcome. Thank you, Richard, for joining me here today. So just to welcome you all to Richard. Richard Blakesley is the founder of Capital Pilot, which is an investability rating agency for startups and scale-ups. Fantastic. Lovely to have you here today.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. So what I've really done is to hopefully bring some of my former skills in financial structuring and understanding how deals get done from my banking career into the world of startups, where now with 12 or 13 not always particularly successful startups under my belt, I've had the real life experience of trying to do the fundraising at the coalface, if you like. So that combination of experience I think is quite helpful as we try and figure out what the right solution is for a massive problem for startups, which affects not only individual startups, but the economy as a whole, because we all know that the growth of startups and the continuation and scaling of startups is massively important for the UK economy as a whole.
Fantastic. And just to delve a bit deeper into the problems that exist in the sort of investment space today, would you say that investment is given sort of equitably to startups? Would you say it's quite an exclusive sort of bubble that's hard to penetrate for people who don't have contacts, say, in the industry itself?
It's extraordinary, really, how cliquey the investment industry is. And I'm talking really about the early stage VC space. And as I said, having worked in investment banking in the 1980s, and the reputation that the City of London had as a sort of a gentleman's club back then, believe me, it's not very different currently as far as the VC world is concerned. And you get phrases being used such as, I will only, from VCs, saying, I will only look at a company that's been introduced to me by somebody I know. Now, on the one hand, we have to understand why that is, because otherwise these individuals will get drowned in a wave of massive numbers of startups applying to them for funding. But at the same time, come on, if we're thinking about the importance of diversification in a startup portfolio and the need to get lots of different types of business in a portfolio in order to ensure that portfolio's success, diversity actually is a really important piece of it. And if you're only investing inside your bubble of network contacts, not great. And on conversely, of course, you have founders who are somewhat better placed to access those networks, that bubble, than others. And there's this great thing, it's not just a UK thing, by the way, it's a US thing. You've got to have gone to Stanford and you've got to have been part of the Y Combinator Accelerator program in order to get into the top VCs in Silicon Valley. So it's not a UK problem, it's a universal problem, and it's all about cliquiness and networks and self-referential, and it's an echo chamber. So you don't necessarily get the diversity and diversification that you should have in the system. And of course, when you're looking at innovation, it is rather bizarre to think how non-innovative the investment space that focuses on innovation really is.
Fantastic. And that leads me on to Capital Pilot and what you're doing to innovate that space, so Capital Pilot you set up in 2016. It's a rating agency focused on startups and scale-ups. Could you explain your approach and who Capital Pilot is and what you offer as a product?
Absolutely. So the key area that we thought we needed to tackle was signaling. So making sure that those founders who don't have great networks because they didn't necessarily go to the right school or university, and they haven't necessarily got friends of friends of friends of parents that can make the right connections for them, had the ability to signal themselves properly to those investors. And the signal can only come from some sort of a quality mark. So we created a rating system. And if you think about the Equifax model for individual credit scoring, what Equifax is doing is saying to you, the individual, this is your current credit score. Here are a few things you can do to increase your credit score, and these are the things that you can do as a result of your credit score. These are the financial services that you have access to as a result of your credit score. And if you increase your credit score, you have access to more services potentially. On the other side, you've got lenders and providers of other financial services using Equifax to decide whether or not to give you access to their services. So that was the model that we had in mind for our rating system. But there are two or three things that are really, really important here. The first is it must be a sort of a universal and neutral system. So, and there's a problem, because Equifax has got access to lots and lots of data about you, the individual that they're scoring, from all of your banking transactions, from your credit card usage and so on and so forth. The same is not true for a startup. There's very limited hard data associated with a startup. So the rather clever thing that we're doing is measuring and rating subjective judgment. What is it that makes this an investable startup versus a non-investable startup? And we're therefore measuring and rating things like the quality of the team, or the strength of the business model, or the attractiveness of the target market. Subjective, qualitative judgments, but we're putting numbers on them. And we are able to put numbers on them because we break down those big, fluffy, subjective questions into lots and lots and lots of more precise, objective questions that can inform the overall decision about what is investability or not. So we've been doing this for a very long time. We've iterated it many, many times. And having now done hundreds and hundreds of ratings for hundreds and hundreds of companies, we know that we've got good correlation between the ratings that we give companies and their fundraising outcomes. So it kind of works. But the clever thing is really about putting a number on a subjective judgment.
Yes. And so founders who then do the scoring system, they presumably get recommendations from you on how to improve their credit score, their sort of investability score, which is fantastic. So do you have any examples of founders who were previously struggling to get funding and then through obtaining your capital pilot rating subsequently managed to get funding?
So we've done pushing 1,000 ratings for companies now. And so we've got lots and lots of examples of different sorts of companies, but a couple of examples. So there's one company I can remember from fairly early on that got a really, really bad rating. And we were a bit worried about delivering that bad rating to the founder. And it comes in a 24-page report, and it explains why the rating is poor and where the areas are that are driving that poor rating. And to our surprise, we got this fantastic email back from the founder saying that they were delighted to have had this neutral view of their business. And it was very clear what was wrong with their business, and they were going to go back to square one and think the whole thing over again. And they felt that we delivered a very good service to them, even though we'd said, your business is really, really bad. So that was one example of how this all works. At the other extreme, you've got companies who are actually very good, but they perhaps don't have the confidence, or they've spent a lot of time fundraising unsuccessfully. But knowing that we've given them a high investability rating gives them an extra push. And there's a company called Technologies that probably fits into that category. They do some really clever stuff around geofencing, so the ability to locate very precisely a mobile phone user and to provide them with relevant messaging according to their location, if they're walking on a high street, special offers for the coffee shop, for the retail store, and whatever else it may be. And they probably fall into that category. And then there's a third category. There's a company called Dashboard that we've actually done probably 3 or 4 ratings for over time. Deep tech business that's built a very novel sensor system for large industrial plants, which measures a whole variety of different data points to identify where there might be a process fault, particularly, for example, a leak in a pipeline or something like that. And they've struggled to bring to market a deep tech industrial proposition because your average investor likes a mobile app or a software proposition more than a hardware proposition. And they've been able to not only refine their proposition based on our input, but also to use our suggestions as to who they should approach from the investor perspective to secure a significant amount of investment funding over the last couple of years and grant funding. And they're now well on their way with industrial partnerships and so forth.
Wonderful. So presumably you have access to a whole network of investors and can match startups with investors, which is fantastic. So
there's almost a sort of a trick in that comment, of course, Francesca, because you're suggesting that I might be part of a bubble and a clique. Because
no, I'm not trying to.
But we know investors, we know lots of investors, of course we do, but we're not going to pretend we know more investors than we do, which is another little bit of an illness in the early stage fundraising process. Intermediaries who say, oh yes, well, I'll fundraise for you, I'll find investors for you, but I'm not going to tell you who we're approaching. And if I'm unsuccessful in finding you fundraising, I'll probably tell you it's your fault because your business isn't very good. So that's a well-known illness in the sector. And what we do is we say, here's your list. Here are the names on the list. And if you'd like us to make introductions to any of them, we will tell you whether or not we've got a strong enough relationship with them to do that or not. If we don't have a strong enough relationship, we will tell you so, because there's probably a better way that wastes much less time for you to find somebody else who can make the right intro.
So you're saving time, money, and you're being incredibly transparent, which is fantastic. So having operated for around about 4 years and accumulated a lot of data on early stage companies, can you tell us some of the insights that you've gained from Capital Pilot that you might have not have thought of before, and some of the research reports that you've published as of late?
Right, so we did a big campaign over this summer, specifically in July, and we offered 500 free ratings and assessments out via accelerators and incubators and startup support organizations. A fantastic response, and we gathered some actually very surprising data. So if you go back to your previous question about the clubbishness of the early stage fundraising market, here's a stat for you. 79% of funding for early stage businesses goes to companies that are based in London. Only 21% goes to companies that are based outside London. 10% of money, roughly, goes to female-founded businesses. 10% of money, roughly, goes to BAME-founded companies. And so one of the things that we were interested to establish was, okay, we know where the money goes, but we don't necessarily know where the demand is, other than by hearsay. So as a result of this big program that we ran in July, we can tell you where the demand is. The demand is 37% female founded rather than the 10% that actually get money. The demand is about 65% out of London rather than 21% out of London. And the demand is about 36% BAME founded as opposed to 10% where the money goes to. So that's the demand. But then you might say, well, what about the quality of that demand? Because that's another important factor. Well, guess what? BAME-founded businesses outperform white-founded businesses. Female-founded businesses narrowly outperform male-founded business by 0.5% or so forth. And in addition to that, 8 of the 13 regions of the UK outperform London. And this is in terms of the quality of the companies. Now, to do this study properly, we'd need tens of thousands of data points rather than 1,000 odd, if you like. But it's pretty interesting that the actual state of the investment market versus the demand has a massive skew. And it's a bit of a wake-up call, we would argue. We're delivering that wake-up call at the moment to all investors to say that not only is diversity a good thing from a societal perspective, it also just makes good sense from an investment perspective.
Wonderful. And by demand, do you mean the demand for funding by founders? Okay. Correct.
The amount of money that is, or the number of founders that are looking to raise money. Correct.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, so at Virtual Global Village, we're trying to encourage enterprise to be more conscious about the impact they're having and to have a net positive impact as opposed to potentially even a negative one. And it's wonderful to see the work that you're doing to make the investment space more inclusive. Can you tell me about some of the other initiatives you might be involved with Capital Pilot in terms of having a positive impact, and what you might encourage other companies, startups and scale-ups to do to have an impact?
So not only are we trying to build a commercial business on the back of a proposition that makes sense and is, as you say, more inclusive and reaching all areas of the country, all demographic types and so forth. So any founder anywhere with any business model has got equal opportunity. So that's the very core of our business plan. And it's a great one because it's not only, we think, a purposeful business plan, but also a good commercial business plan. So joining the two together is great. In addition to that, there's a scheme that we're involved with called Genie Shares, genieshares.com, just in case anybody wants to involve themselves, and I really hope they will do. And this is a relatively new movement that involves early stage businesses, but not necessarily only early stage businesses, pledging 1% of the equity of their company to a societal cause that has some personal relationship with them. So my cause, I'm a pledger to Genie Shares, so we have pledged 1% of the equity of Capital Pilot to a social inclusion cause, which is based on the fact that I grew up in a very beautiful village on the edge of the Peak District in Derbyshire, only about 4 miles away from one of the most deprived former mining towns in the entire country, one of the most deprived towns in the country. And there's this gulf that is less than 4 miles wide. And that has always seemed very strange to me. And there are people out there who are trying to alter that situation and bind together communities despite these gulfs that exist within very short distances. So our pledge is to an individual who is working very hard, not necessarily in North Derbyshire where I'm from, but somewhere around the country, to bridge those gaps, if you like, between the haves and the have-nots, between those that have access to lots of opportunity and those that feel that there is really very limited opportunity for them. So that's what we do as far as Genie Shares is concerned. And we're also encouraging all of the startups that we work with to join the Genie Shares movement. Frankly, 1% of the equity of your business costs you nothing. Being part of a movement like Genie Shares gives you an enormous amount, and we're encouraging everybody to participate in that.
Wonderful. Sounds like a fantastic initiative, and so lovely to hear your story and how far you've come in, and to be able to give back like that is and to pay it forward is a wonderful thing. Thank you so much for your time today. Do you have any closing comments or messages that you would like to pass on to any founders who are maybe struggling during this time of COVID-19, or any sort of words of wisdom or good advice you've received over your career?
Well, I could probably take up as much time as we've already taken with bits of advice. Let me try and limit it to a couple of things. So the first thing I'd say is fundraising isn't clever. Fundraising isn't a cool thing to do. It's actually a very painful thing to do that takes your eye off the ball of your business. So if you can avoid fundraising by any means possible, then do so, particularly at the current time, but actually it persists for any particular economic situation. So try to avoid fundraising, raise revenue, get a grant, borrow a bit of money, whatever you can do to avoid a fundraising, I would say is a very smart thing to do. The other thing is keep a very clear and level head as a founder, making sure that you are actually pursuing a business goal that is relevant in the current market conditions, because they're changing so fast. So keeping your eyes up as well as your eyes down on your business is really, really important. And move fast, keep changing. I'm about to use that horrible word that I don't like very much, which is pivoting. So move with the times, be agile, and make sure that you're staying ahead of the game in terms of where the market's changing, because that is the way that you will not only impress your existing and future shareholders by demonstrating as a founder your ability to be flexible, but also it's the way that you'll find yourself in a position to fundraise and scale up your business eventually.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your closing words. It was great to be able to speak to you today, and thank you so much for your time.
Francesca, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.